The satisfying crunch of splintering pine was a symphony to Karen Miller's ears. It was the sound of order being restored, the sound of rules being enforced. Her pristine white Lexus SUV, a chariot of suburban justice, recoiled slightly from the impact, its state-of-the-art suspension absorbing the jolt with a gentle sigh. Through the windshield, she admired her handiwork, the flimsy wooden gate, an arrogant and unapproved structure erected at the mouth of the Whispering Pines Estate's access lane, now hung in two sad, splintered halves from its posts. There, she said aloud to the empty passenger seat, her voice crisp with the authority of 1,000 successfully levied fines for unapproved mailbox colors. That'll teach them. She reversed, the tires of her SUV crunching over the gravel she considered HOA common property, and surveyed the scene. The lane was, in her interpretation of the extensive and sacred Whispering Pines bylaws, an aesthetic thoroughfare. It provided a rustic scenic entry point to the back of their prestigious community, bordering the untamed wilderness where property lines became suggestive. And this gate, this crude defiant barrier, was a blight. It was a middle finger, fashioned from cheap lumber, aimed directly at the heart of the community standards she had sworn an oath to protect as president of the Homeowners Association. The owner of the cabin at the end of the lane was new, some tech bro from the city. She'd heard, probably thought he could escape civilization and its necessary regulations. He hadn't attended the mandatory new resident orientation a cater to fair wear. Karen personally explained the vital importance of lawn height uniformity and the 37 approved shades of beige for exterior trim. Strike one. Then, he had installed this gate, without submitting a single form, no architectural change request, no property improvement plan, no fee. Strike 2 and 3. Karen pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the camera icon. She needed evidence for the violation notice. Not that she needed much evidence beyond the splintered remains of the gate, now decorating the entrance to the lane. She'd document the initial state of the unapproved structure later, from memory. For now, she would simply report the lane as obstructed and now cleared. She was, in a way, a first responder for aesthetic emergencies. Back in her immaculate home, a temple of beige and tasteful HOA-approved decor, Karen sat at her mahogany desk. Her husband, Gary, a man whose presence was as muted and inoffensive as their living room wallpaper, was at his golf club. The silence was her sanctuary. It allowed her to focus on the work that truly mattered. She opened her laptop, the screen illuminating her face, which was set in a mask of grim determination. She pulled up the Whispering Pines Estate's digital bylaws, a document she knew more intimately than her own wedding vows. She scrolled to Section 14, Article C, Subsection 2. All structures, including but not limited to fences, walls, and gates, visible from any community common area or aesthetic thoroughfare, must receive prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. The ARC was, of course, herself, Brenda from Two Houses Down, a woman whose defining personality trait was agreeing with Karen End, a retired dentist who usually abstained. It was a well-oiled machine of swift, unwavering judgment. She began to type the violation notice. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, composing a symphony of passive-aggressive legalese. Dear occupant of 14 Wildwood Lane, she began, refusing to grant him the dignity of his name, which she could have easily looked up in the county records. It has come to the attention of the Whispering Pines Estates Homeowners Association that an unapproved structure, specifically a wooden gate, has been erected at the entrance of the primary access lane. This is in direct violation of. She paused, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips. She would make this sting. She would bury him in citations. She added another violation. Furthermore, the materials used, unfinished pine lumber, do not comply with the approved materials list found in Appendix F of the Community Covenants. And another, the structure also constitutes a potential impedance to emergency vehicle access, a violation of community safety protocols. She attached a hefty fine, $200 for the unapproved structure, $50 a day until it was removed, another $100 for the non-compliant materials. The numbers gave her a little thrill. They weren't just numbers, they were quantifications of his disrespect. They were the price of lawlessness. She printed the letter on official HOA letterhead, the embossed logo of a stylized pine tree giving it the weight of a papal bull. She wouldn't mail it. This required a personal touch. She would post it directly on his cabin door, a public declaration of his transgressions. The drive to the cabin itself was an offense to her senses. The smooth asphalt of Whispering Pines gave way to the bumpy, unkempt gravel of Wildwood Lane. The manicured lawns were replaced by overgrown ferns and audacious, unzoned wildflowers. It was chaos. The cabin itself was a rustic A-frame, all dark wood and sharp angles. It was probably full of spiders. She got out of her Lexus, the violation notice clutched in her hand like a holy writ. She marched up the stone path, her sensible heels clicking with purpose. As she reached for the tape in her purse to affix the notice to the door, an email notification pinged on her phone. The subject line was simple: your recent visit to my gate. Karen froze. Her heart gave a little flutter of something. Surprise? Intrigue? She tapped open the email. It was from one Alex Chen, the cabin owner. Hello, the email read. My property's security camera alerted me to some activity. At my gate a little while ago, the footage shows a white Lexus SUV, license plate HOA 1, deliberately ramming and destroying the structure. I've attached a short video clip for your reference. I also have the survey documents for my purchase confirming that the gate and the access lane are entirely within my private property lines, not on any HOA common ground. I trust this was a misunderstanding and look forward to receiving your insurance information to cover the cost of a replacement. I'd like to resolve this amicably. Regards, Alex Chen. Below the text was an embedded video. Karen's finger trembled as she pressed play. There it was. Her Lexus, clear as day. Her determined face visible through the windshield. The brutal, deliberate impact. The sound, captured by some hidden microphone, was even more crunchingly vivid than she remembered. Her first feeling was not shame or fear. It was white-hot rage. How dare he? How dare he record her? How dare he throw property lines and survey documents at her, as if those flimsy papers could override decades of established community precedent. That lane had always been considered part of Whispering Pines. Her predecessor, Mildred, had always said so. Amicably, he thought. He could threaten her with video evidence and then talk about being amicable. This was blackmail. This was an attack. Karen's mind raced, sifting through options, dismissing them. Apologize. Never admit fault. Unthinkable. This changed nothing. In fact, it changed everything. He had escalated this from a simple bylaw infraction into a personal war. She looked at the violation notice in her hand. It suddenly felt inadequate. A paper shield against a cannonball. She needed more firepower. She stormed back to her car, her face a thunderous mask. She drove, not home, but to Brenda's house. Brenda, with her perpetually worried expression and her endless supply of herbal tea, was the perfect sounding board. She would see the situation for what it was, an assault on their way of life. Brenda? It's an emergency, Karen said, brushing past her friend into the chintz-filled living room. The new cabin owner, he's a menace. As she explained the situation with some strategic omissions and embellishments, of course Brenda's eyes grew wider and wider. Karen painted a picture of a hostile outsider, a man who used surveillance technology to intimidate law-abiding community leaders. The gate wasn't a gate, it was a fortress wall. The email wasn't a request for reimbursement, it was a threat. He sent you a video, Brenda gasped, clutching her throat. That's terrifying. It's an invasion of your privacy. Exactly, Karen affirmed, pacing back and forth on Brenda's plush carpet. He's trying to bully us. Brenda, he thinks his city money and his fancy cameras can just roll over our rules? He thinks he's above the community. What are you going to do? Brenda asked, her voice a whisper. Karen stopped pacing. A new plan, grander and more audacious than the last, was beginning to form. This was no longer about a single gate. It was about jurisdiction. It was about setting a precedent. If they let this slide, what was next? People painting their doors. Unapproved shades of crimson. People letting their grass grow wild. It was a slippery slope to utter anarchy. He wants to play hardball, Brenda, Karen said, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone. Fine, let's play hardball. She wouldn't just send him a fine. She would call for an emergency. Vote from the board. They would officially declare the access lane as a protected aesthetic thoroughfare. They would pass a special resolution retroactively banning any and all gates on it. They would bury him in so much official paper, so many new rules, that he would have no choice but to surrender. And they would use HOA funds to hire a lawyer, not to defend her, but to prosecute him. But first, a more immediate response was required. A show of strength. He had destroyed her sense of righteous anonymity with his camera. She needed to reassert her dominance. That evening, after Gary had... The silence from the cabin was more unnerving than an angry email. For 3 days, Karen heard nothing. She checked her inbox obsessively, a nervous tick that betrayed the bravado she projected. Every ping of a new message sent a jolt through her, a mixture of dread and anticipation. But there was nothing from Alex Chen, no irate response, no new video clip, just nothing. In the vacuum her victory began to feel hollow. The glorious, deafening crack of the gates splintering under the force of Gary's Ram truck echoed in her mind, but without the subsequent outrage from her opponent. It was like a punch thrown into empty air. Gary had been predictably apoplectic about the new deep scratches on his grill guard. A deer, Karen. A deer in Whispering Pines. It must have been the size of a moose. Did you get a photo? We should report it. It could be a danger to the community. She had managed to deflect him with a flurry of vague details and a promise to have the truck detailed, but his suspicion lingered in the air between them, like the smell of burnt toast. On the 4th day, as she was inspecting Mrs. Gable's new petunias for color compliance, they were a shade too vibrant, bordering on rebellious. She saw it. A work van marked, which was a violation in itself, was parked at the entrance to Wildwood Lane. 2 men were unloading materials. Not wood, something dark, something metal. Karen's heart hammered against her ribs. She abandoned the petunia inspection and drove her Lexus slowly, cautiously, toward the lane. She parked a discreet distance away, partially hidden by a row of perfectly manicured cypress trees, and pulled out the binoculars she kept in her glove compartment for just such surveillance operations. Through the lenses, the scene snapped into sharp focus. The 2 broken posts had been removed. In their place, 2 thick, square steel pillars were being set in deep concrete footings. The men were professional, efficient, their movements precise. They were not weekend handymen. They were contractors. Serious ones. Lying on the ground beside them was the new gate. It wasn't a gate. It was a barricade. It was fashioned from heavy-gauge steel, a brutalist lattice of thick black bars, reinforced with cross-bracing. It looked less like something for a residential property, and more like something to keep a velociraptor from escaping its paddock. There was no simple latch. Instead, a complex-looking electronic actuator box was being mounted to one of the pillars. Karen lowered the binoculars, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. This was a direct, calculated response to the Ram truck. He had assessed her capacity for destruction and had engineered a solution that would, without a doubt, obliterate the front end of Gary's trucker, her Lexus, if she ever attempted another assault. The cost of this, it must have been thousands. This man was not just defiant. He was wealthy and willing to spend. Humiliation warred with fury inside her. He was making a mockery of her. He was building a monument to her powerlessness. Right on the edge of her domain, the silent treatment, the professional contractors, the fortress guy tight, was all a meticulously planned psychological operation. Just then, her phone buzzed. A text from Brenda. Certified letter for you at the clubhouse. Karen looks official. Karen's blood ran cold. Certified letters were never good news. They were the harbingers of legal trouble, the formal start of hostilities. She drove to the community clubhouse, her mind a maelstrom of worst-case scenarios. The clubhouse attendant, a college student who always looked vaguely terrified of her, handed over the stiff envelope with a trembling hand. Karen retreated to her car before opening it, needing the privacy of her leather-scented sanctuary. Her name and address were typed with crisp, impersonal precision. The return address was a law firm she didn't recognize. Chen Albright and Associates. Chen, it was his family's firm. Of course it was. He wasn't just a tech bro, he was a legacy. With shaking hands, she tore it open. The language within was cold, sharp, and utterly devastating. It was a formal cease and desist order. It meticulously cataloged the 2 separate incidents of destruction of private property, citing dates, times, and the make and model of the vehicles involved. It referenced the video evidence from the first incident and an eyewitness statement from a passing motorist for the second. A bluff. She prayed, but a chilling one. It demanded she, Karen Miller, personally cease all contact, harassment, and trespassing. It forbade her from setting foot on the Wildwood Lane property, which, it clarified with an attached, professionally rendered survey map, began exactly 2.3 meters before the start of the gravel. Her Lexus had been parked on his property during her first violation report. Her feet had been on his property when she'd attempted to post the notice, and then came the final, brutal blow. The letter included a detailed invoice, replacement of custom pine gate, Incident 1, $850. Labor, Incident 1, $300.00, replacement of custom pine gate, Incident 2, $850 labor, including removal of damaged posts, Incident 2, $550. Emergency call-out fee, Incident 2, $250. Total, due, $2,800. The letter concluded with a chillingly polite sentence. Mr. Chen is still hopeful that this matter can be resolved without resorting to filing a formal criminal complaint for vandalism and a civil suit for damages, which would also name the Whispering Pines Estates HOA as a co-defendant due to your stated position as acting on their behalf. Payment is due within 30 days. Karen felt the air leave her lungs. $2,800. And the threat of naming the HOA, that was the true poison dart. If the HOA was sued, their insurance premiums would skyrocket. The board would turn on her. Her presidency, her entire world, would crumble. He had her pinned legally and financially. The calm, silent man in the cabin had just checkmated her. But Karen Miller was not a woman who accepted checkmate. She was a woman who flipped the board over and claimed the other player had cheated. Panic gave way to a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. This was an existential threat. Her carefully constructed reality, where she was the arbiter of rules and the enforcer of order, was under direct assault from an enemy who wielded lawyers and lawsuits as his weapons. She couldn't smash this problem with a truck. She had to fight it on his turf. She immediately called an emergency meeting of the HOA board. Not just Brenda and the retired dentist, but the entire 5-person board. She framed it as a hostile legal challenge to community sovereignty. They gathered. That evening in the clubhouse meeting room, Karen stood before them, the cease and desist letter in her hand, her expression a carefully crafted mask of beleaguered righteousness. She told them the story, her version of it. This person, she began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "This Alex Chen has decided to launch a vicious, unfounded legal attack, not just on me, but on this entire community." She explained the gate situation, framing her actions not as vandalism but as necessary enforcement of long-standing community standards. Regarding the aesthetic thoroughfare, she portrayed the video evidence as an illegal act of covert surveillance designed to intimidate. She presented the invoice not as a bill for damages she'd caused, but as an extortion attempt. "He is trying to bully us into ceding control of our own accessways," she declared, her voice rising. "He is attempting to annex HOA common property through legal intimidation. If we let him do this, where does it end? Will he claim the park is his? The clubhouse? This is a land grab, pure and simple." Brenda looked horrified, nodding vigorously. The dentist, Mr. Fitzwilliam, squinted, polishing his glasses. The other two board members, a pragmatic accountant named David and a flighty woman named Sharon, exchanged uncertain glances. "He has a survey map, Karen," David said, his voice leveled. "The letter says so. Have we seen it? Does our own survey conflict with his?" Karen waved a dismissive hand, a piece of paper. "David, that lane has been used by our residents for 20 years. 20 years of precedent. That is de facto ownership in the eyes of common sense. His map is likely fraudulent, a scare tactic, and the destruction of the gates." Mr. Fitzwilliam ventured timidly. "The letter seems to imply you were personally clearing an unapproved and hazardous obstruction." Karen shot back, her eyes flashing. "As is my duty as president. Imagine if an ambulance needed to get through. I took decisive action to protect this community, and for that, I am being threatened with lawsuits." She let that hang in the air. She was the martyr, the selfless leader taking the slings and arrows for her people. "He is threatening to sue the entire HOA," she said, her voice dropping to a grave whisper. "He wants to bankrupt us, to destroy everything we've built. We cannot let that happen. We must fight back. We must hire our own lawyer, a strong lawyer, one who understands the importance of protecting community values. I move that we allocate up to $10,000 from the reserve fund for the legal defense of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association against this baseless aggression." Brenda seconded the motion immediately. "We have to support our president." David, the accountant, looked deeply uncomfortable. $10,000. "Karen, our reserve fund is for capital improvements, not litigation. And if his survey is correct and you are on his property." "If," Karen interrupted, her tone sharp as broken glass. "A big if? Are you suggesting we just roll over, David? Let this outsider dictate our boundaries and threaten our members? We need to show strength. We need to send a message." The gate haunted her. For weeks, Karen found her Lexus instinctively drifting toward the edge of Whispering Pines, drawn by a morbid curiosity she couldn't suppress. The black steel barricade was an unmoving, silent sentinel, a constant reminder of her legal and tactical humiliation. Bill Peterson's letter had sent ripples of dissent through the board. David the accountant was now openly questioning her leadership in emails, copying everyone. Her power, once absolute, was now conditional, fragile. She had staved off a vote to rescind the legal fund, but only by promising a new, strategy. She didn't have one. All she had was a simmering, helpless rage. Then one Tuesday morning, everything changed. As she made her customary soul-crushing drive-by, she saw that the black steel gate was gone. Her heart leaped. Had he given up? Had he finally seen the error of his ways and removed the offending structure? For a fleeting, glorious moment, she imagined victory. She pictured herself at the next HOA meeting, announcing that her steadfast resolve had won the day. But the work van was back, and the thing they were installing, it defied all her categories of thought. Karen pulled over, her mouth agape. She fumbled for her binoculars, her hands shaking so much it took a moment to focus. What she saw was so bizarre, so outrageously outside the realm of her experience, that her brain struggled to process it. It was a gate, but to call it a gate was like calling the Sistine Chapel a painted ceiling. It was a sculpture, a massive, intricate, kinetic sculpture. It was forged from a chaotic menagerie of welded steel, gears, sprockets, polished scrap metal, and what looked like repurposed farm equipment. The whole thing was arranged into the shape of a fantastical, vaguely draconic beast. Two great, sweeping wings, made of what might have been the hoods of old cars, were folded at its sides. A long serpentine neck crafted from motorcycle chains and exhaust pipes curved upward, ending in a head with glowing amber-colored glass eyes. It was steampunk. It was junkyard art. It was magnificent. And it was the ugliest, most breathtakingly audacious thing she had ever seen. She watched, mesmerized and horrified, as one of the installers held up a small remote. He pressed a button. With a low, satisfying hum of powerful electric motors and the clicks and whirs of dozens of moving parts, the sculpture came to life. The wings didn't swing open. They unfurled, segment by segment, like a mechanical pterodactyl stretching after a long sleep. The neck lifted, the head rising to look down the lane, and the entire central body of the beast retracted sideways into a housing unit disguised as a rock formation. The opening was clear. Karen felt a dizzying cocktail of emotions. In spite of herself. The sheer engineering brilliance of it was undeniable. But that awe was drowned in a tidal wave of apoplectic fury. This wasn't a gate, this wasn't a barricade, this was a spectacle, a performance. It was a giant, mechanical middle finger, aimed directly and personally at her. Alex Chen hadn't just built a better gate. He had built a monument to her defeat, and turned it into a tourist attraction. Every bylaw she could think of screamed in her mind. Aesthetic incongruity, unapproved artistic installations, structures not in harmony with the natural but it was so unique, so far outside the cookie-cutter world of vinyl fences and brick mailboxes. The bylaws were designed to govern, that it almost transcended them. How could you write a violation for a dragon gate? The sheer unmitigated gall of it rekindled her fire. The legal threats had cowed her, made her feel small. This was different. This was a public challenge to her authority, her taste, her entire worldview. And it couldn't stand. Her new non-confrontational strategy was born in that moment of incandescent rage. She couldn't smash it, she couldn't sue it, so she would shame it. She would expose it to the world as the ridiculous, tacky monstrosity it was. Her first step was to whip the community into a frenzy. She spent the next 2 days on a whirlwind tour of Whispering Pines, knocking on doors, her iPad in hand. "Marge, have you seen the thing he's put up at the end of the lane?" she'd say, her voice dripping with concern. "It's a safety hazard. Those moving parts could snatch a child. And the glare off that polished metal at sunset, it's a traffic risk." To others, she appealed to their financial sensibilities. "A junkyard sculpture at the entrance to our community. Can you imagine what that does to our property values? Who wants to buy $1 million home next to a scrap heap?" She took dozens of photos from every conceivable angle, documenting what she called its aggressive ugliness. She sent a new official notice, not a fine, but a formal request for aesthetic review, citing a dozen different vaguely applicable bylaws. It was, she knew, legally toothless, but it was a necessary formality for her real plan. Her plan was a protest, a community rally for traditional aesthetics. She printed flyers, she sent a mass email, she stood at the community mailboxes, and handed them out. Stand up for Whispering Pines. Protect our property values. Say no to junkyard gates. The day of the rally was a crisp Saturday morning. Karen stood proudly, holding a professionally printed sign, "Harmony, not hardware." Brenda was at her side, her sign proclaiming "Our eyes are sore." About 15 other residents had shown up, a mix of her loyalists, the morbidly curious, and a few retirees who just enjoyed any form of organized activity. It wasn't the army she had hoped for, but it would have to do. Her masterstroke, however, had been a carefully worded tip-off to a local news station. She had called their community concerns hotline, speaking in a panicked voice about a bizarre and potentially dangerous structure causing a major dispute in a prominent local community. She mentioned the rally, hoping a camera crew would be tempted by the promise of conflict and quirky visuals. To her delight, a news van from Channel 8 pulled up just as they were starting to chant. A young, ambitious-looking reporter named Cynthia Ramos stepped out, a cameraman in tow. Karen's heart swelled. This was it, her moment of vindication. "Ma'am, are you the organizer of this protest?" Cynthia asked, microphone extended. "I am Karen Miller, president of the Homeowners Association," Karen said, adopting her most professional and concerned tone. "We are here today as concerned citizens. This structure," she gestured dramatically at the dormant metal dragon, "is a gross violation of our community's established aesthetic standards. It's an eyesore, a potential danger, and it's severely impacting the property values and quality of life for the families who live here." She launched into her well-rehearsed speech, hitting all the key points: the bylaws, the lack of harmony, the traffic hazard, the sheer tackiness of it all. She presented herself as the calm, reasonable leader of a besieged community, fighting to protect their peaceful way of life from an eccentric and inconsiderate outsider. The reporters seemed to be eating it up, nodding along, asking, clarifying questions. The cameraman got plenty of shots of the signs, the concerned faces of the residents, and, of course, the magnificent, silent gate. Alex Chen was nowhere to be seen, which was perfect. It allowed Karen to control the entire narrative. The segment aired on the 6 o'clock news. Karen gathered with Gary and a triumphant Brenda in her living room to watch. The story began, and Karen preened. There she was, looking authoritative and articulate. "A battle is brewing in the upscale community of Whispering Pines," Cynthia Ramos's voiceover began. "A dispute not over property lines, but over art and aesthetics." Karen's smile faltered. "Art?" The story then cut to an interview she hadn't seen them conduct. It was with a professor of modern art from the local university. "What you have here is a fascinating example of outsider art, a piece of kinetic sculpture in the..." Steampunk tradition, the professor said, looking delighted. The artist, Alex Chen, is actually quite well known in certain circles for his mechanical installations. This piece, from what I can see, is technically brilliant and whimsically imaginative. It's the sort of public art that cities pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to commission. The camera then cut back to Karen. It's a junkyard. Her voice shrieked from the television, sounding shrill and foolish after the professor's calm analysis. The report continued, framing the story not as a legitimate community dispute, but as a quirky, grumpy homeowner versus genius artist piece. They showed her sign, harmony, not hardware, then immediately did a slow, dramatic pan over the intricate, harmonious movements of the gate's machinery as it opened and closed. They even dug up an old article about an award Alex Chen had won for a similar sculpture in another city. The segment ended with Cynthia Ramos standing in front of the gate, a wry smile on her face. While the HOA president sees a violation, she said, others might see a masterpiece. In Whispering Pines, it seems beauty is truly in the eye of the beholder. Cynthia Ramos, Channel 8 News. The story was a catastrophe. It hadn't made Alex Chen look like a villain. It had made him look like a misunderstood genius. It had made her look like a hysterical, uncultured buffoon. The phone started ringing before the credits even rolled. It was David, the accountant from the board. Karen, did you see Channel 8? Did you see the comments on their website? They're calling us the Beige Brigade? They're calling you the Dragon Slayer? This is a PR nightmare. She hung up on him and frantically pulled up the news station's website. The comments section was a bloodbath. LOL, let me get this. The laughter followed her everywhere. It wasn't audible, but Karen felt it in the way her neighbor's eyes darted away when she walked to the mailbox. In the sudden silence, when she entered the clubhouse coffee room, in the strained, artificial politeness of her husband's voice, the news story had gone viral in their small, gossipy town. The Dragon Gate had become a local landmark. Teenagers took selfies in front of it. An art blogger had written a glowing review, calling it a triumph of suburban rebellion. Every mention was a fresh stab at her pride. Her authority on the HOA board was in tatters. David, the accountant, was now openly calling for an emergency session to discuss her recent actions and their negative impact on the community's reputation. He had the votes now. Her reign was effectively over. She was just waiting for the official guillotine. Karen Miller, however, was not one to abdicate. If she was going down, she was taking the dragon with her. Her obsession, once a matter of principle, had curdled into something personal and venomous. Alex Chen hadn't just defied her, he had humiliated her. He had turned her into a caricature. In the sleepless black hours of the night, she would lie awake and picture the gate's mechanical wings unfurling, mocking her. The worry of its gears was the sound of his laughter. Logic and reason had fled. Her world had shrunk to a single, burning imperative. The gate must be neutralized. She began to plan her assault with the meticulousness of a military general. Smashing it was out of the question. It was clearly indestructible by conventional, car-based means. The public protest had backfired spectacularly. That left only one option: sabotage. Her target was the control box, the electronic brain she had seen the installers mount to the steel pillar. If she could disable that, the gate would be frozen, inert. It would be a hazard, just as she'd claimed. It would block the lane. The fire department would have to be called. They would have to cut it apart. An official, legitimate destruction of the monster. And she wouldn't have laid a hand on it, not directly. For 3 nights, she conducted reconnaissance. Dressed in dark clothing, she'd park her Lexus a street over and creep through the wooded buffer zone, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilarating purpose. She brought her bird-watching binoculars, this time to watch for motion sensor lights, cameras, and patterns of activity from the cabin. The property was dark, quiet. Alex Chen was clearly a night owl. A single light often burned in an upstairs window until the early hours of the morning. But the gate itself was a fortress. She identified 3 separate cameras pointing at it from different angles. One was a dome camera mounted high on a tree. Another was a small, almost invisible lens integrated into the gate's rock-like housing unit. The third was the most obvious, mounted directly on the pillar beside the control box. Disabling the cameras was too risky. Her only chance was speed and stealth. A quick surgical strike under the cover of the new moon. She assembled her tools from Gary's meticulously organized garage, a heavy-duty crowbar, a pair of wire cutters, and a small high-intensity flashlight whose lens she covered with red cellophane, a trick she'd seen in a spy movie. She dressed in black from head to toe, including a ski mask she'd found in a box of old winter gear. Looking at her reflection in the hallway mirror, she didn't see Karen Miller, HOA president. She saw a commando, a righteous shadow warrior on a vital mission. On a moonless Thursday night, just after 2 a.m., she put her plan into action. The air was still and cold. Every snapped twig under her feet sounded like a gunshot. She crept through the woods, her senses on high alert, the heavy crowbar cold in her gloved hands. She reached the edge of the tree line, her vantage point from the past few nights. The Dragon Gate was a hulking silhouette against the faint glow of the distant streetlights. The amber glass eyes seemed to watch her, ancient and knowing. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the ski mask smelling of mothballs and old fear. The light in Alex Chen's cabin was off. This was her chance. She broke cover and scurried across the gravel, her movements clumsy and loud in the oppressive silence. She reached the pillar, her back pressed against the cold steel, her heart thundering like a drum solo. She risked a quick flash of her red-lensed light on the control box. It was a standard industrial-grade panel, held shut by 2 heavy-duty hex bolts. This was a problem. She hadn't brought a wrench set. Panic flared in her chest. Had she come all this way? For nothing. She looked at the crowbar in her hand. It wasn't subtle, but it would have to do. She wedged the tip of the crowbar into the seam of the control box door, and pushed. The metal groaned in protest. She put her weight into it, her muscles screaming. With a loud pop, the lock gave way. The door swung open. Success! A wave of triumph washed over her. She shone her light inside. It was a dense, terrifying tangle of wires and circuit boards. Red wires, blue wires, thick black cables, a central processor with a small blinking green light. It was the dragon's heart. Now for the final act. She lifted the wire cutters. Which wire to cut? The thickest one, the red one. In the movies, it was always the red one. She reached in, the jaws of the cutters hovering over a thick, insulated cable leading from the main power supply. This was for the bylaws. This was for the property values. This was for Gary's shame and her own public humiliation. She squeezed. The moment the cutters bit through the insulation, 3 things happened at once. First, instead of the gate dying, it roared to life. Every light on the street she didn't even know existed flashed on, bathing the entire lane in a blinding, strobing white light. The amber eyes of the dragon glowed with ferocious intensity. Second, a sound erupted from a hidden speaker, a sound so loud and piercing it felt like a physical blow. It wasn't a siren, it was a deep, synthesized, resonant voice, calm and utterly terrifying. Trespasser detected, anti-tamper mechanism engaged. You are currently being recorded in high-definition infrared. Please do not move. Law enforcement. It has been automatically notified and dispatched to this location. Their estimated time of arrival is 4 minutes. Third, a fine, almost invisible mist sprayed out from the control box, covering her hands, the crowbar, and the front of her black jacket. It was odorless and colorless, but she felt the chilling dampness soak into her gloves. Pure, animal panic obliterated every thought in her head. Law enforcement. For minutes, recorded, she was caught. Utterly, completely, catastrophically caught. She dropped the tools. She turned and ran. She didn't scurry. She scrambled, falling to her knees on the sharp gravel, tearing her pants, before lurching back to her feet and sprinting for the darkness of the woods. The strobing lights behind her made the trees flicker like a horror movie, and the synthesized voice continued its calm, damning countdown. 3 minutes, 45 seconds. She crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at her face, her lungs burning. The ski mask was suffocating her. She tore it off, gasping for air. She didn't stop running until she reached her car, fumbling with the keys, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fit the key in the ignition. She sped away, turning on her headlights only when she was miles away, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. She drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, expecting to see flashing blue and red lights in her rearview mirror at any second, but they never came. When she finally crept back into her house just before dawn, she was a wreck. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her face was scratched, her nerves were shot raw. Gary was still asleep. She stripped off the soiled clothes, shoving them deep into the bottom of the laundry hamper, and stood under a scalding hot shower for 20 minutes, scrubbing at her hands, trying to wash away the memory of the cold, damp mist. The next day was torture. Every passing car was the sheriff. Every phone call was the news of her arrest. But the call never came. The police never arrived. Silence. Just like before. The same terrifying, calculated silence from the man in the cabin. On Saturday morning, 2 days after her failed raid, she was trying to force down some toast when she saw the work van again, parked by the gate. She watched through her binoculars, her stomach churning with dread. A man not Alex Chen, but another technician was standing at the control box. He wasn't repairing it. He was collecting something. He carefully placed her crowbar and wire cutters into an evidence bag. Then, using a special UV light, he swabbed the front of the control panel and her discarded ski mask, which he had plucked from a bush. He placed the swabs into another sealed bag. The mist, it must have been some kind of invisible forensic marker. Smart water. She'd read about it somewhere. Untraceable, undeniable evidence linking her to the scene. He knew, Alex Chen knew she had been there. He had her dead to rights. He had video, he had her tools, and he had forensic evidence. He could send her to jail, but he hadn't. The psychological torment was infinitely worse than an arrest would have been. He wasn't using the law against her. He was using her own fear. He was letting her imagine the worst, letting her twist in the wind, waiting for the axe to fall. The power dynamic had shifted completely. She was no longer the enforcer. She was the mouse. And the dragon, she now realized, was the cat. A very patient, very intelligent cat, who was enjoying the game far too much. He had all the evidence he needed. The question that screamed in the terrified silence of Karen's mind was, what was? The silence lasted for 168 hours. Karen counted every single one of them. For 7 days, she lived in a self-imposed prison of anxiety. She didn't leave the house. She screened all her calls. She jumped every time a car drove down the street. She lost weight. Dark circles formed under her eyes. Gary kept asking what was wrong, his brow furrowed with a mixture of concern and irritation. She would just shake her head. Unable to form the words to explain the magnitude of her impending doom, the HOA board, led by David, had formally scheduled the emergency meeting to discuss her presidency. It was set for the following Saturday. Her public execution was officially on the calendar. The psychological warfare was brutally effective. An arrest would have been a singular, terrible event. This slow, drawn-out suspense was a continuous, rolling torture. Alex Chen had moved beyond simple legal or physical confrontations. He was now actively dismantling her sanity. Piece by piece, she found herself staring at the Dragon Gate through her binoculars, not with hate, but with a kind of terrified reverence. It wasn't just a sculpture, it was his fortress, and he was the untouchable king within it. Then, on the 8th day, the silence broke. An email arrived. The sender was Alex Chen. The subject line was chillingly simple. The video? Karen's hands were slick with sweat as she moved the cursor and clicked. Her stomach plummeted. The email was brief, but every word was a hammer blow. Karen, attached is a compressed video file from my security system, time-stamped last Thursday. At 2:13 a.m., it shows you, in detail, attempting to burglarize and vandalize my property's control systems. I have also recovered your tools, as well as forensic evidence from the non-toxic, UV-detectable tagging mist that was deployed. This evidence is sufficient for felony charges of attempted burglary, vandalism, and criminal mischief. We need to talk, thought the Whispering Pines Community Center meeting room. This Saturday at 10 a.m. Come alone. We will discuss the terms of your immediate resignation from the HOA presidency in full. Personal restitution for all damages you have caused since this began. This includes the 2 original gates and the repairs to the electronic systems you attempted to destroy. If you do not attend, or if you involve anyone else, this complete file including the video of you ramming the first gate, the legal correspondence, and this new video will be forwarded to the Marin County Sheriff's Department. A separate, identical file will be sent to the HOA's insurance provider and every single homeowner in Whispering Pines Estates. This is your only chance to contain this. Alex Chen. Karen read the email 3 times, the words blurring through a haze of panic. It was over. He had her in an ironclad trap. Every escape route was sealed. He hadn't just checkmated her, he had disassembled the board, boxed up the pieces, and set the box on fire. The ultimatum was diabolical in its precision. He had chosen the day and time of her scheduled HOA execution. He was offering her a choice, a quiet, private death, or a spectacular public immolation that would not only land her in jail but would make her a pariah in her own community forever. He would destroy her reputation, her marriage, her freedom, all with the click of a send button. For a wild, fleeting moment, she considered defiance, calling his bluff, but she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that he was not bluffing. The man who builds a kinetic dragon gate does not make idle threats. Defeated, hollowed out, Karen typed her one-word reply, okay. Saturday. Morning was gray and overcast, a perfect reflection of her mood. She dressed with deliberate plainness, choosing a simple gray sweater and slacks. There was no armor left to wear. She told Gary she was going to a special HOA budget meeting. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. She walked to the community center, feeling like a condemned prisoner on her way to the gallows. The meeting room, usually the seat of her power, felt alien and intimidating. He was already there. Alex Chen was sitting at the head of the long conference table, the seat she always occupied. He stood up when she entered. He was younger than she had imagined, maybe late 30s, with a calm, intelligent face and a quiet intensity in his eyes. He wasn't dressed in the robes of a tech millionaire, but in a simple flannel shirt and jeans. He looked like a man who built things with his own hands. There was no lawyer with him, no one else. Just him. Karen, he said, his voice even. It wasn't accusatory or gloating, it was just a statement of fact. He gestured to the chair opposite him. She sat down, her hands clenched in her lap. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. She refused to speak first. Finally, he slid a single sheet of paper across the polished wood table toward her. It was an itemized list. Pine Gate 1 materials and labor, $1,150. Pine Gate 2 materials and labor, $1,650, included post replacement and rush order. The Dragon's Heart kinetic sculpture gate, no charge repair 2, control box and actuator, system post tampering. $4,200 specialized components, total restitution due, $7,000 beneath. The total was a typed paragraph. I, Karen Miller, Agree to pay Alex Chen the sum of $7,000 via cashier's check within 5 business days. I also agree to tender my immediate and irrevocable resignation from the presidency and board of the Whispering Pines Estates HOA, effective today. I will issue a formal letter of apology to the community for my recent actions, the wording of which will be mutually agreed upon. In exchange for this, Alex Chen agrees to permanently delete all video and forensic evidence pertaining to these incidents and will not pursue any criminal or civil charges. Karen stared at the paper. $7,000. It was a staggering amount, but she knew she could pay it by dipping into her personal savings. The real price was the other part, her resignation, her public apology, the complete and utter demolition of her identity. The Dragon Gate. No charge. She heard herself whisper, the question absurd in its triviality. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Alex's lips. Let's just call that a capital improvement to my property. You inspired me to upgrade. The casual way he said it, the lack of malice, was somehow more cutting than any insult. She had been a nuisance, a pest he had to engineer a solution for. Karen finally asked, the single word encompassing everything. Why not just call the police last week? Why go through all this? He leaned forward, his calm demeanor finally showing a flicker of something else, not anger, but a profound weariness. Because, Karen, believe it or not, I don't enjoy this. Calling the police would have created a permanent, ugly mess for everyone. For you, for the community, for me. I moved out here to be left alone, not to be the guy who got his neighbor arrested. I gave you an out after the first gate. I gave you a legal, formal warning after the second. You chose to escalate it too. This, he gestured vaguely, indicating the entire sordid affair. I don't want to destroy you. I just want you to stop. And the only way to make you stop, it seems, is to dismantle the authority you've been using as a weapon. His reasonableness was a form of torture. She wanted him to yell, to call her names, to be the monster she had painted him as. His calm, logical dismantling of her life was unbearable. Tears of rage and humiliation pricked at her eyes. You humiliated me. That news story, the gate. You held a protest rally to humiliate me, he countered, his voice still level. You brought the news cameras. I just built a gate. Anything that happened after that, Karen, was a consequence of your own choices. He was right. The realization was a cold, hard stone in her gut. Every step of this disaster had been her choice. Ramming the first gate, using Gary's truck, calling the protest, sneaking onto his property with a crowbar. She was the architect of her own downfall. There was nothing left to say. There was no fight left in her. She picked up a pen from the table holder, her hand shaking. With the last dregs of her pride, she signed the paper. Her surrender was complete. The next hour was a blur of methodical arrangements. They drafted her resignation letter and her public apology. He was not cruel in his wording. The apology was simple, citing a series of regrettable judgments and a desire to allow the community to move forward. At noon, she stood before the emergency board meeting. David was at the podium, shuffling papers, ready to deliver the killing blow. Before we begin, Karen said, her voice a monotone, I have a statement to make. She walked to the podium and read her resignation letter. A wave of stunned silence washed over the room. Brenda looked like she had been slapped. David's mouth hung open. She didn't look at any of them. She placed the letter on the podium, turned, and walked out of the room, out of the clubhouse, and away from the life she had built. As she walked home, under the gray sky, she felt empty. The rage was gone. The fear was gone. The power was gone. All that was left was a hollowed-out shell named Karen Miller. Her reign was over. The dragon had won. The silence that followed her resignation was different. It wasn't the tense, preluditudous daster silence of before. It was the flat, empty silence of irrelevance. For 3 months, Karen drifted through her life like a ghost in her own home. The HOA elected David as the new president. He was sensible, boring, and fair. The beige tyranny was over, replaced by a quiet, functional democracy. There were no more scandals, no more drama. Whispering Pines was peaceful, and Karen was no longer a part of its public life. Her neighbors were civil but distant. They treated her with the careful, awkward politeness reserved for those who have recently suffered a great, public shame. Gary, to his credit, had been surprisingly steady. The end of the dragon tamer jokes and the cessation of her all-consuming crusade had brought a strange, placid calm to their marriage. They ate dinner together, they watched movies. They didn't talk about the gate. They didn't talk about the $7,000 that had vanished from their savings account. They didn't talk about the woman Karen used to be. Stripped of her title and her purpose, Karen found herself doing things she hadn't done in years. She spent hours in her garden, not with a ruler to measure the height of her rose bushes, but with her hands in the dirt, feeling the soil. She discovered a strange solace in the simple, tangible act of pulling a weed or watering a thirsty plant. It was order, but it was a natural, quiet order, not one imposed by bylaws and fines. One afternoon, as she was pruning her azaleas, a small red ball bounced across her perfect lawn and came to rest near the flower bed. A little boy, no older than 5, peered at her through the slats of his parents' fence. His face was a mask of terror, clearly expecting a lecture on property lines and trespassing. The old Karen, the Karen of 4 months ago, would have snatched the ball and marched over to deliver a stern warning to his parents. A violation notice would have been issued, a fine would have been levied. It was an automatic, well-worn reflex. But the reflex was gone. She looked at the terrified child, then at the red ball. She felt nothing, no anger, no sense of violated territory. She picked up the ball, walked to the edge of her lawn, and gently rolled it back under the fence. The boy, stunned, mumbled a thank you and scampered away. Karen watched him go, a strange, unidentifiable emotion fluttering in her chest. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't sadness. It was just quiet. A week later, a detour for road paving forced her to take a route she had religiously avoided, the long way around, which meant using the Wildwood Lane access road. It meant she would have to face the gate. She had paid her restitution. Alex Chen, true to his word, had sent a simple email, confirming receipt of the cashier's check and stating that the relevant files have been permanently deleted. He had given her a small, sleek remote for the gate, a final, practical term of their treaty. As her Lexus approached the end of the lane, her heart began to beat a little faster. There it was, the dragon. It was just as she remembered. A magnificent, intimidating sculpture of steel and gears. In the bright afternoon sun, it didn't look as menacing. It looked beautiful. The way the light caught the polished curves of the metal, the intricate complexity of the welded chains, it was undeniably a work of art. Her past fury over it now seemed absurd. Like being angry at a mountain for being too rocky, she held up the remote and pressed the button. With that same, smooth, hydraulic hum, the gate began its mesmerizing transformation. The wings unfurled, the head lifted, the body retracted. It was a fluid, powerful dance of engineering. But this time, being so close, she saw something she had never seen before. Her perspective had always been from a distance, clouded by rage, or from below in the terrified darkness. This time, she saw the details. And as the main body of the beast slid sideways into its housing, a section of intricate metalwork that was usually hidden came into view. It wasn't just a random assortment of gears and sprockets. It was deliberate, and welded into the steel, so cleverly that they were almost part of the design itself, were letters. Karen's foot hit the brake. The car stopped, the gate fully open. Before her, she squinted, leaning forward over the steering wheel. The letters were subtle, crafted from bent rebar and curved steel plates, flowing with the lines of the sculpture. But they were unmistakable. They spelled a name, Caroline. Karen stared, her mind a complete blank. Carolyn, who was Carolyn? Her entire narrative of the past few months collapsed in an instant. She had built a grand operatic saga in her mind, a battle of wills between an HOA president and a defiant homeowner. She was the hero of her story or the villain of his. The conflict was about rules, aesthetics, power, and control. The gate was a weapon, a fortress, a monument to her defeat. But what if it wasn't? What if this whole, epic, life-altering conflict had been for him about something else entirely? What if her war had been just a noisy distraction from his own private, quiet purpose? The gate wasn't a fortress built against her. It was a shrine, a memorial, the loving detail, the insane expense, the fierce, uncompromising defense of it. It wasn't about a property line. It was about protecting this name. Who was Caroline? A wife, a child, a mother, someone lost. Someone he was honoring with this fierce, mechanical, beautiful dragon that guarded the entrance to his sanctuary. A wave of profound, soul-shaking shame washed over Karen. A shame far deeper and more real than the public humiliation she had endured. Her crusade, her obsession, her rigid, had all been so incredibly small. She had been so consumed by her own petty kingdom of bylaws and beige paint that she had been completely blind to the possibility of a real, human story happening right in front of her. She hadn't just been a bully. She had been a dictator. She had repeatedly, violently attacked what was clearly a monument of love and grief. She remembered his words in the meeting room. I moved out here to be left alone. The words echoed in her mind now with a terrible, tragic weight. He hadn't been seeking conflict. He had been seeking solitude. And she, in her righteous fury, had relentlessly invaded it. The worry of the gate's machinery had stopped, but the sound echoed. In the sudden silence of her car, it was no longer the sound of mockery or victory. It was the sound of a question that would likely never be answered. A question that recontextualized every single action she had taken. Karen put the car in drive and slowly rolled through the gateway. She didn't look back. She just drove, her eyes on the road ahead, her world tilted on its axis. The dragon was behind her now, guarding its secret, and for the first time, Karen Miller felt the terrifying, liberating weight of a mystery far bigger than herself. Her story was over, but she had a chilling feeling she had only ever been a minor clownish character and a much more important one. And the not knowing, she suspected, would be her real final punishment.